go over some housekeeping stuff. Sweet. Thank you, Liam. I forgot I was waiting for you again. Going to go over some housekeeping stuff because people on here who were not on here yesterday. Oh, what's up? Hi, Mr. A. How are you? If you have relevant information that you know from your life and you want to contribute at any time, you are totally welcome to do so. It would be fun to have a guest here. Going to have to not make all of those inappropriate jokes that I wasn't going to make anyway. Okay, so here's the deal. People have been asking about due dates, and I took a look at what was happening when we were turning in the classroom assignments for Google Classroom. And for my utility, it looks like that's going to work pretty well. The reason for that is that the way our online gradebook is set up, it is easier to enter grades by assignment than by student. Like, for instance, if I hit the enter button, it goes down the column. It doesn't go across the row of student names. So that's the way that Google's going to go ahead and organize it for me. So I'm going to make all those different assignments, and I'm going to ask that you upload your stuff to that. Javon had an idea about maybe having stuff in a Google folder, which I think is a fantastic idea. But if you could link to the assignment, the spot where it says turn in your assignment, that would really help me out. So that way I can go through, I can score all of the assignments. I'm not sure that I'm going to use the scoring feature on Google Classroom, but I can score them from my own perspective, and then I can get that put into Infinite Campus. Yes. So anything that you haven't annotated yet, like, it hurts my heart to say this, but if you haven't annotated it yet, your life and my life will both be easier if you take your notes on a separate sheet of paper. So you would upload lots of pictures of your packets that you have already annotated if you have done so, and then you would upload 1 or 2 pages of your notes that you have for each assignment. I would encourage you to turn them in individually, like you will literally turn them all in individually. And I would encourage you to turn them in as you go along, because otherwise on the 17th, everybody's going to be totally hating life. The only drawback to that, and I feel good about having the 17th as a due date for all of that, I feel like that's given you effectively, unofficially, you've had a month of being, at least a month, maybe really more like 5 or 6 weeks for the Unit 7 stuff, that you've been aware that that's going to be a thing. The downside of having everybody turn everything in on the 17th is that means that nothing is going to get entered into the gradebook really prior to the 17th, because, like I said, I score the assignments by assignment. So that means that you're going to kind of for your grades. And then once you do all turn it in on the 17th, it's going to take me a while to go through all of that and get all of those things posted. So let me talk about the standard of the work that we're doing. In general, you got half credit if you just highlighted the packets, and you got full credit if you had multiple annotations on every page. Obviously, taking notes, you're going to be writing different stuff than you would be writing if you were annotating. So I would try to make note of the things you think it is essential to remember. So, and we're going to talk, like, for instance, we're going to talk through part of the Cold War packet today. And if you remind me, we can go over some examples of what kinds of things would be essential to remember. That means that for something big like the Cold War packet, you're probably looking at 2 pages front and back, or a little bit more of notes on something of that size. Also, just an FYI, if you don't have your Cold War stuff in front of you, I would encourage you to get it out so that you can follow along. As far as video notes go, I would say for crash course and stuff, you're looking at less than half a page if it's handwritten. For the podcasts that are like an hour long, maybe a full page. Really, A lot of that stuff is stuff that we're doing instead of having lecture in class, or sort of to substitute for that in some way. So like I hate it when teachers use this, but some of that is going to function kind of as a completion grade. You know, we have an engagement category, and it's like, well, did you engage in the learning? The goal is that, yes, you actively engaged in your own learning. So if you actively engage and take what I just defined as an appropriate amount of notes, then there isn't really a reason you shouldn't be getting full credit. Questions about that so far? See, we have one person typing. Everybody else is clear. You're all okay on that? Okay, remind me what the unit, oh, perfect. Okay, Cole just preempted my question. So the information for the Unit 7 packet is different. Those sheets correspond from, okay, Katie, I'll get to you in a sec. So the sheets in the Unit 7 packet correspond to chapters in the black textbook, you know, the one that we don't use all that often. So think of that as sort of a reading guide, and they basically go in order. There are page numbers that's referring to the page number in that big black textbook. And if it has like a vocab word, what it's looking for in the blank line next to it is basically a definition. But even maybe more important than the definition, particularly if you're already familiar with it, you should write why that thing is historically significant. Okay? Like sort of knowing what it is kind of the bottom of the barrel. That's step one. But knowing why it matters and why people actually care about it, that is what's going on. You know, that's the most important, essential thing for you to remember is, why does this historically matter? Who cares? What is the purpose of this going on? Katie, I would say that if you make notes about the Cold War packet as we are talking today, you can use those as part of what you end up turning in. I think that would be just fine. And, you know, if you're not doing, like for the rest of you, if you're not doing something else with your hands right now, that might be a decent use of your time, because then you can at least have some notes that relate to parts of that packet. Other questions? Did I answer the questions that you just asked? Well, not like dead air is so much more awkward when we're not in person. Anthony, what's up? I haven't seen you on here. You doing okay? Okay, so we are going to be turning work in on Google Classroom. I'm going to make an assignment for each and every one of those tasks that I've got listed on the updated plan that I posted yesterday. You will turn in all of those things individually. That means that if you annotated a packet, you can take photos of the pages. You might even go ahead and like take a photo of 2 pages at a time, just so that you don't have 60,000 photos of AP World stuff on your phone. But you can upload it and turn it in there, and then that way I can score it. No problem. Okay, so Liam, that's a great question. Say that you've been doing all of one type of assignment in one Google Doc. Just make sure that there are clear headings between them, and then you can post the same Google Doc in all of the different assignment spots. Like, I'm definitely smart enough to find the heading of the thing that's relevant. You don't have to split it up. You can link to the same document, and I'll figure it out. Again, we'll see exactly what the district is going to end up requiring. Sure that they are going to have a minimum number of assignments. So maybe we'll have some engagement assignments where, you know, I'll host different sessions like this, and you get an engagement grade for showing up and for listening. That might be something that we can do before that 17th date. So yes, Zach, you are correct. We will upload all assignments individually on the 17th or before. You can upload them early. That's not a problem at all. And then I think, unless I am crazy, I've uploaded the links to all of the reading packets. And the only thing that I haven't put up the links for are the Dig History podcasts. There might be a couple of, like the extra history, I might not have put the links up for that yet. But for the most part, like, and the difficult to find one I actually posted on Google Classroom a few minutes ago. But I think that with the exception of the links, everything that you have is now in your possession. If somehow I failed to upload those packets, somebody let me know. I think I did, but maybe I'm wrong. Yes, the recorded history one, I couldn't think of it. The recorded history one I already posted. Also, even like the one thing that is, I think it's 16 or 17 minutes that's on recorded history that is required, that's it. Just, it's a short one. Recorded history has information on a huge number of historical topics, so that can potentially be useful to enhance your understanding of the content we're currently working on, or when you go through the review process of units 1 through 6, it can be potentially useful for that as well. But it's a really crazy, interesting resource that's got unbelievable, unquantifiable amounts of information. Housekeeping stuff? Any more housekeeping questions? Will you guys do me a favor, those of you who are here, if anybody hops on and asks a basic housekeeping question, can you either, one, answer it for them, or let them know that I will review the housekeeping stuff again at the end of the call? And I will try. See, that is literally the number one thing that I hate, is that Liam can post all the links, except they're only in red one. So I will try to repost the portions of that are relevant. 2 pages front and back, maybe a bit more than that. And again, the glossary and terms, those are things that you really should, you are not going to need to take notes on those because it's already all there. Okay, so we're going to flip past that first page with those definitions. Keep it, well, it's going to be handy because yours are all in one file there for you. The next thing, there's a graphic organizer. It says East Side versus West Side, points of view in the Cold War. And there's an East Side point of view, which is essentially the USSR, and then a West Side point of view, which is essentially the United States and NATO. You might want to make something that looks like that. Otis, I'm actually tempted. I'm tempted. One time, my son, when he was in first grade, he got in trouble. Like, you guys remember Class Dojo? He got in trouble. They said that his teacher said he was talking out of turn, and I was absolutely horrified because my son is the sweetest, best behaved person in the world, and I just couldn't imagine him like disruptively talking to a friend while the teacher was speaking. I just couldn't get my mind around that, and so I asked her, and she said, "No, he's not being disruptive. The out of turn talking, it's a little more like having a co-teacher." And then I died laughing because that made absolutely perfect sense. You know, he had relevant information that he wanted to add to whatever she was already saying. And so I forgot how I put those together. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, so format, there are 2 separate Cold War packets, but it might all be in the Garrett packet. That might be the way that I uploaded it for you when I did all my scans. Where did I put all that stuff? Easily on Google Classroom. Am I crazy? Oh, the Garrett one I handed to you is a paper copy. Yes? Is that right? Okay. try looking back here on what I did. Did I not post a different Cold War packet? Okay. Give me 2 seconds and I will post that for you. And because that's actually the one that I want to talk about. My bad. I'm really sorry, guys. Put it in a Tupperware container. It's in the fridge. Can you do me a favor before you do that though? The flash drive that's on the thing where I do my makeup, can you grab it for me? Thank you. I'm not talking about the Garrett packet, although we can talk about that one too, but I'm really glad that you guys mentioned that because that's probably why Zach is saying, when are you going to put the resources up? I'm saying I did, when really and truly. If any of you guys enjoy The Onion, there is an article that I think is kind of timely, and it's something to the effect of, nations workers are moments away from getting on digital conferencing software. Very much feel like that resonates with me right now. Okay. 2 seconds, talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
No.
To 1939, but the audacity and the insanity of what Hitler was doing definitely made it make sense to have an alliance. However, by the middle of the war, so by the conference at Yalta in 1943, there was a big divide about what they thought they were going to do with some of these territories if they won the war. There was a big divide because, of course, the USSR was just sending all of those peasants to the front. And this is where I was talking about the movie Stalingrad, where they say, every man gets a box of bullets and every other man gets a rifle. And they tell the man that doesn't have the rifle to follow in front of the man in front of him. And when he gets shot and killed, you pick up his rifle and then you go forward. So Russia doesn't really have enough equipment, but they totally have enough people to keep throwing at Germany, and that's what they do. And of course, France has been taken over. The government of France that is existing in England at the time, plus England, and eventually after 1941, the United States, are saying, okay, yeah, we're going to fight, we're going to open up a second front. But we all know that doesn't happen for real until 1944, which means that for 5 years, Russia's like, okay, any minute now, yes, we see Royal Air Force, great, we appreciate that you're dropping some bombs and stuff, but could you please open a land war so that they stop slaughtering us so badly and you take some of the brunt? And they're like, we're totally about to. But, we're going in by sea, so we have to wait for time when they're, when it's warm season, when it's on a day when it's not cloudy, and when there's no moon in order to do this. And the Russians are just over there really rolling their eyes because they think this is pretty critical. So Churchill is the one who coins the term, he says an iron curtain has fallen. And the first thing that happens after that is that you end up sort of having these separate camps. In the West, they set up NATO. Well, right. So really it was the English Channel that needed to be not cloudy, but yeah. So they needed good weather and a new moon. It was, yeah. Okay. So NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We still hear about this today. Yeah, we still hear about NATO today. It's still a thing. You don't really have to be on the Atlantic. For instance, Italy is a founding member of NATO, and they are really not at all even a little bit touching the North Atlantic, but that's what they named it. Pretty much all of the NATO countries took those Marshall Plan funds, and Marshall Plan was the thing that the U.S. government did where they gave low interest loans and lots of help and assistance to help countries rebuild themselves. And they also offered all of those funds to countries that were occupied by Russia at the end of the war, the USSR at that time, but the USSR did not allow them to take those funds. NATO and or the Warsaw Pact. So Warsaw Pact was the Soviet response. They were like, well, you're going to have a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, so we're going to make our own military thing. And it never worked as well. It was never as strong. It was never as wealthy. But that was the initial alliance that bound all of those communist or communist-influenced countries together. Okay. It's either, I think it's an extra history that I've got on the Berlin airlift. It's a pretty cool thing that happened. So if somebody wouldn't mind, if somebody's on a real computer and you can easily look it up, it would be great to get a map of East and West Germany that shows where Berlin is. Berlin was in East Germany by about 100 miles, if I'm not mistaken. And both the whole country as well as Berlin itself were split initially into 4 zones. There was an American zone, a British zone, I think it was an Italian zone. It was Italian or French, and then the Russian zone. And pretty quickly, the 3 Western allies combined their zones together. Okay, perfecto. Thank you, whoever got that. Look at you guys. Oh, and Shrita, that's a great picture too. Look at this. I love the participation. You make me so happy. Okay, so yeah, so if you look at the picture that Liam posted, you can see that Berlin is way, way, way over there. And then if you look at what Shrita and Sushruth posted, you can actually see the different divisions in the western part of Berlin. Okay, so thank you guys. That's perfect. So pretty quickly, you go from the picture that looks like the one Shrita posted to the picture that looks like the one Liam posted, where West Germany sort of all becomes one agglomeration. And the Western allies do that both in West Germany, and then they also do that in Berlin. And initially, you know, those are just separate occupation zones because there was going to be occupation. They definitely didn't pick those lines with that becoming like a permanent national boundary. That was not something that they had in mind when they selected those things. So time goes by, the boundaries become more and more solid, less and less fluid. The USSR decides that they are really, really sick of is there an enclave in the picture for the U.S.? Why is there or why isn't there? So in the picture that's got the 4 different colors, if you look, it shows East Berlin, part of it's red, there's a little sliver that's blue up at the top, then there's green, and then there's yellow. But they all got slammed together into one zone. Literally, Jonathan, I have no idea what that is. Like, I don't even know what country that is. That's supposed. If it's, and that might be where the British embassy is. I have no idea though, really. Okay. So, anyways, the USSR starts to get pretty irritated because West Berlin is West Berlin is getting Marshall Plan funds and they're, investing in it. It is growing and developing economically, is not there. They are not getting funds. They are not developing economically. So as you can imagine, if people want to have a good time and they're in Berlin, they go to West Berlin. And if people want jobs that say pay better and aren't on a communist sort of plan, they go to West Berlin. And it serves as this reminder just deep, deep inside of what has become, or at least something like a Soviet protectorate. It's really just like a big FU to the communists. And it's showcasing how awesome capitalism is as compared to communism. And of course, the USSR does not like that. So if you look back up at the map, like we talked about, it's way, way, way over there. And there was basically one main road that went more or less straight west from Berlin into the other portion of Germany that was controlled by the Allies. And what they did was they shut down the road. So this was before the actual Berlin Wall was built. That's later. But they shut down the road and effectively blockaded all of the people in West Berlin. And they were like, hey, we need you to give this to us because we're sick of you being here. We want you to leave. And the Allies were like, yeah, I'm thinking that's not going to happen. And they were like, well, we're going to block you in. And the Allies were like, okay, you do you, but we're going to do what we have to do. So what the Allies end up doing is for almost an entire year, and it was a year that included a really, really brutally cold winter, they airlifted in all of the food, all of the coal, all of the fuel, all of the clothing, everything that you needed to conduct everyday life was delivered twice daily via these airplanes. Yes, that was the main road from West Berlin to West Germany, and it was through the Soviet occupation zone. Yes, and they closed. And then they didn't let anybody come or go into West Berlin, and they had no supplies, and they were freezing, and they were starving. And the Allies were like, well, this really doesn't work for us. So, yes, like Danny said, it was pretty whack. So they do this airlift, and this goes on for almost a year. What ends up happening at the end is that finally the USSR realizes, okay, this really isn't going to work. And if you're reading in your packet, it says there are about 2.5 million people who were living there. So yeah, they were not a fan of that. It ends up that they are indeed successful. And then my very favorite thing is that when the USSR opens that road back up, what they announce is that, oh, wonderful, all of our repairs on the road leading from West Berlin to the west have now been completed, and we are happy to announce the road once again is open and available for everybody now that we are done with those all-important repairs that we've been carrying out over the past year. Right. So that's another thing that often happens with totalitarian governments is that there's like an unwillingness to admit the truth. Hey, we tried to blockade them so that we could get this territory, but it didn't work, and we're not willing to keep this up. So we were fixing the road, and now it's all better. Go for it. Have fun. Yay, communism. Yay, propaganda. You can get propaganda from the other side as well. Has anybody listened to either the Fascism and Uteruses or Communism and Uteruses podcasts yet? Okay, bye Otis. Bye Mr. A. All right, so if you listen to those, they also give you a pretty solid idea of what totalitarianism looks like during this time frame. But they also give you a sense of the propaganda that was used both on the far right and the far left to achieve those. Okay, so you can read about those occupation and division We'll skip over the Hungarian Revolution for the time being. The Cuban Revolution. So this really, really stuck in the craw of the United States, right? They, you know, the United States really believed that it had most, it's the one that starts with Cuban Revolution at the top. It's, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 pages in. Unfortunately, they don't have numbers, but it says Cuban Revolution, Cold War comes to the Western Hemisphere. So, doctrine, the United States says, you know, that we have a policy where nobody from the Eastern Hemisphere, Eastern Hemisphere is willing to, or is allowed to come mess with the Western Hemisphere. You know, like it's not okay. And then here you have this communist revolution, and it's not exactly that the Eastern Hemisphere is coming over and messing with it. This is sort of organic-ish. And now we have communists right there in Cuba. If you've ever seen the musical Guys and Dolls, this really drove home the point for me. Like in the musical, they go on a date, like in Cuba, they fly to Cuba because Cuba is close enough to Florida and New York that you can fly if you're rich. It's easy to do because it's really, really close. And now there are communists really, really close to the United States. The United States is really, really not here for that. Technically, Cuba is still communist. They have recently had some more expansive economic policies. They are now letting Americans in. They didn't let Americans in for a long time. The United States tried to overthrow the Cubans, and that was really a pretty serious disaster. It was the Bay of Pigs. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the United States had overthrown a dictator in Guatemala, but they did it like, they made it look low-key like a local movement, but really it wasn't. And they reported on it and said that it was completely bloodless, and suggested that this was a very good possibility. It was a good way for the United States to conduct business. And they sort of misrepresented it to the president. So there were some misunderstandings about what was likely to happen with the Bay of Pigs, right? The idea behind it was that they were going to land there and all the Cuban people were going to be like, OMG, thank goodness, the Americans are finally here. We hate communism. We're all going to join your cause, and you're going to be able to like squash out these communists in 12 seconds. So that's not what happened. And it was in part because they had this bad information based off of what happened in Guatemala, that they thought that it was going to work, but it didn't. A whole page, front and back, on the Korean War. Somebody was asking about this. There are some good maps, but basically you have communists versus nationalists. Their Chinese communists are coming from the north. The American nationalists are, they're concerned that the Korean nationalists have been pushed almost all the way off the peninsula. So once the Americans show up, they push the communists almost all the way back to the border of China. Right, they could have just stopped, but they got greedy. So they go all the way up to China, and then they get pushed back down, and then now people died in this. Let's see. This particular document that you have in front of you says North Korea and China, 1.5 million casualties, and then maybe 750,000. So it's putting the figure at about 2.5 million deaths. I've heard numbers as high as 4 million. My mic is whack. Oh no. Am I back? Okay. So if somebody wants to get one of those maps of the, if somebody wants to get one of the maps that shows, or a series of maps that shows the Korean Peninsula, would be a cool thing for us to see. So I'm not better yet? No? Okay. I'm going to disconnect and come right back. Let's see if that helps. Okay, is that any better, guys? Can you hear me now? Okay, that is a good start. So then you just have to imagine that the, oh, you can't see my screen, that's a bummer. But yeah, so they've got the different front lines. So you've got the front line from September of 1950 is in red. The front line from November of 1950, almost all the way back to China, is in blue. And yes, they were, yeah, I know I can go live on my screen, but yeah, my screen's most of the time not that interesting. I just wanted to point at the map for a quick second. But thank you. I might do that at some point in the future. So another fun thing that you guys, anti-American propaganda, or like North Korean anti-American propaganda, because this conflict is like not over for them. They hate the United States. And I mean, when you lose 1.5 million or more people, to some other folks, they're like, why are you even here right now? You know, does that make sense? Oh, yeah, that's rough. So the Americans are manhandling the woman. That's always difficult. Looks like they're about to drop a baby down a well. The screaming little girl who's got a gun pointed at her head. Very, very ugly conflict. It was a very ugly conflict. So, and really, again, the United States, why were we even there? We were there because we were trying to stop the spread of communism, because we somehow thought that that was our duty. You know, we were like the world police of communism. Let's see. Let me see if I can find another one. See. This one. Good one too. And the one that I just posted, you can see that they've got the missiles pointing at the White House. Looks like that is a Korean soldier who is neck stomping Donald Trump and breaking his neck. I mean, and there's plenty more where that came from. So even though this conflict started in 1950, which you counted is 70 years ago, the hatred for the United States has been a significant unifying force for the people of North Korea. And the government is very much, you're right, Liam, my bad. I know the difference between the White House and the U.S. Capitol, I swear. This is very, very much alive in their historical imagination. And when we talk about Israel and Palestine, that's another example of events that happened, 70 plus years ago that are literally currently affecting politics, but also where people are very much kind of living in the past and still having the way things used to be or historical events from a long time ago impacting their actual life. Questions about Korea? Well, and a lot of times, to Susha's point about the dictators, a lot of times the United States all over the world supported leaders who were pretty significantly authoritarian, were friendly towards the United States, even if they were bad for their own population. They supported those leaders against communist leaders who, in some cases, would probably have netted better outcomes for the majority of the people if they'd had more socialist leaders, right? But there was very little distinction that was drawn between socialism and communism. And of course, everybody was trying to, by everybody, I mean the East and the West, they were trying to encourage people to sort of come over to their cause and whatnot. Okay, so next page is the Vietnam War. The United States really didn't need to be in. We really didn't. Getting involved because France was working to leave the Indochina, and they were looking to get out of this ongoing conflict. So the United States basically took that up. Oh, quickly. So North Korea becomes isolated for a couple of reasons. Once the United Nations starts putting significant sanctions on them, they really do start to struggle, but they don't want people to see they're struggling. They certainly don't want people from their country defecting and going to South Korea. There are some really good documentaries about what life is like. They have a reasonably close relationship with China, but even that is kind of fraught with some difficulties, particularly since China has much more of a Western orientation now than it did for a very long time, right? So if we're looking at what countries are really, truly communist to this day, really North Korea is probably the only example. And the only way they've been able to maintain that is to maintain very strict control of their borders and to not allow anybody in that they don't approve of. And again, it is tremendously, tremendously totalitarian. And it's got all of the hallmarks of that, right? You've got the dictator, you've got the giant military parades, you've got that, you've got the military consuming a majority of the resources, the very limited resources, right? And like once the United Nations realized that when they were sending normal food, that it was being pilfered and given as rewards to people who were militarily loyal, they started sending, things that were closer to oatmeal and gruel and whatnot, because those are not the kinds of foods that you really would appropriately be giving to your top generals as a reward. Like the humanitarian aid is there because the children are growing up hungry, not because we want that pilfered to continue to feed and support the military apparatus. So Vietnam War, U.S. steps in, France steps out. And JFK was very against becoming involved in Vietnam. He did a good job of keeping us out of that conflict, but if we end up watching the movie, I think it's called 6 Days, about the Cuban Missile Crisis, you see there were a lot of people in the U.S. military establishment who felt very, very bad, like as in embarrassed, ashamed of what happened with the Bay of Pigs, and really looking for a chance to go and show what the United States could do and to be effective in a war against communism, right? So we involved ourselves. We said that it was to prevent the domino effect where, communism affects other countries and they all basically fall down, and the United States thinks that they're the bulwark, they're what's going to stop it. Yeah, the fighting in Vietnam was incredibly brutal. Liam brought up napalm, which, if you're not familiar with, is it's like styrofoam and gasoline melted and mixed together and set on fire, and it will stick to you and burn while it's sticking to you. It's really, really horrible. And we just used to drop that all over the place. Next year, you might end up reading the book, The Things They Carried. if you're bored, it's a book that you could read now. It is about the war in Korea. I don't like it. Like, I taught that book when I taught English, and I do not like that book. It's just really heavy. It's just really, it's a pretty heavy topic because there's a concept. It's referred to by historians as the fog of war. And basically the idea is that there are battle type situations where it's, an artificial but real life and death situation where you vilify and dehumanize the enemy, and then you do all kinds of really, really horrible things. And you see horrible things done, and then you participate in more of them, and it's just awful. Did the U.S. do anything major with Pol Pot? So Pol Pot is Pol Pot's later. Pol Pot is I'm blanking. What's the name of the country? Pol Pot's country?
Cambodia.
Oh yeah, Cambodia. Right. Pol Pot's a little bit later, and no, we didn't do a whole lot about that. Okay. The book is called The Things They Carried. So the Khmer Rouge also... Huh? What? Yeah, I know. We were talking about the Vietnam War. Somebody just asked about Pol Pot. Okay. So the Khmer Rouge, they're these guys that actually, they were French educated, and they got these Marxist ideas, and they decide that they're going to do the whole communism thing. This is like in 1975. So they basically, there's a coup, they overthrow the government of Cambodia, and they institute a new policy. And they decide that it's all going to be communist. And this should harken back to a lot of the things that about other communist societies, because that's awesome. The U.S. did very, very little about the Khmer Rouge, but I don't think most other people know, and there could be a question on this, so I want to make sure that we cover it. Well, it wasn't just that they kidnapped people, they emptied the cities. Like, they basically forced all of the urbanites out into the countryside. They had them commingle with the people who'd already lived in the countryside. They put them on these giant collective farms, which of course failed. So then there was mass starvation. They made children into soldiers and enforcers, because children can be very idealistic and easily trained. And, they informed on all kinds of people, including their own parents. Sometimes they would just get people who had glasses because they were like, oh, they're part of the intellectual class. And they were like, we don't need an intellectual class. We need to go back to our rural roots. Krause, you have to say?
Okay. Also talk about the Mayor Days of the 3 harvest seasons. And that.
Hang on, I'm not talking right now. And guys, so they also were looking back at Great Khmer Society, which I want to say was like 900, 1200. I'm thinking, I don't remember the exact date right now, but right. So they're like because they're red because commies, and they're thinking that if they can do it right, they can get 3 rice harvests per year like they used to do back in the good old days. And yeah, it just ended very badly. And it wasn't just random shooting. It was shooting people for unbelievably dumb infractions, because totalitarianism. And then same deal. They had people in S21, which was a prison. There were killing fields where they would just literally kill people. There are books I can recommend on that, although those are really, really heavy. I would maybe not say that they're a good choice for quarantine. But there's also a really good movie. Do you remember the name of the movie? It's kind of a movie, kind of a documentary. Is it literally called Killing Fields? I don't know if that's the one I'm thinking of. The one I'm thinking of follows this journalist who's like super cocky and then like actually realizes something horrible is going on. I'm blanking on the name of it, but yeah, so that's a thing that's possible. Oh no, that's a different one than the one I'm thinking of. Sure.
All right. So the United States and Western powers did absolutely nothing in Cambodia. No one could find it on the map, and everyone's low-key racist. So who comes to the rescue of regular, Cambodian people and overthrows the Khmer Rouge and all their killing ways? Their neighbors, the Vietnamese. The same Vietnamese we had been at war with and we lost to, and they had a unified country. And they're like, yo, neighbor to our west, you are way too crazy. You need to stop. And they're like, no. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll just invade you. And that's what happened. Vietnam invaded Cambodia and stopped the Khmer Rouge in the 80s.
The U.S. bombed Laos and Cambodia during the Vietnam War. Totally different time frame.
Yes.
Totally different time frame. So, yeah. So also, tricky thing. So technically what happened, even though the Khmer Rouge killed, I don't know, I think it's between 1 and 2 million people, technically most of that isn't a genocide, because a genocide, you have to be seeking to exterminate a national, religious, ethnic, or racial group. And technically, the Khmer Rouge, right, so the Khmer Rouge, for the most part, genocide, but they also deliberately and explicitly targeted a group of people known as the Cham Muslims, and so really that's the thing that gets them monitored. Your own citizens, even at massive scale, does not actually make that happen. Okay, so is it better now? Can you hear me okay? I looked the other way because I got excited. So the United States, about what was happening in Vietnam in the early 1960s, it was almost years later, the Khmer Rouge started, their thing. Okay, is that better? I'm gonna try to balance my computer. Game of Thrones book is okay, so I might want to invest in a mic'd headset, and then my children will use it to play their video games when I'm done with it. Maybe next time. Yeah, I'll do it next time. Ooh, I have wireless headphones that also have a microphone. Yeah, I've got my computer, my laptop set up like a V so that the microphone's right next to my mouth now, so it might be too loud. Okay, but so the United States cared a lot in the early to mid 1960s about stopping the spread of the communist scourge, but we'd kind of moved on to different stuff by the 1970s. Like there was the bottom fell out of the market and there was the oil crisis because of OPEC in 1973. By 1975, the United States is still trying to figure out what to do about this terrible stagflation that's ongoing. So shout out to my macro friends. See you later, Zach. And they just had different priorities. So think of it this way. So if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, which I've never seen and I don't really want to see, because while it is true that people in Mogadishu did mutilate the bodies of Americans who had died, and while that's really awful, too much of that I think promotes a really racist sort of tone, because you sort of start to think that like black people or brown people just go and torture and kill Americans, and it was a lot more complicated than that. But when that happened in Somalia, the United States had been like, oh, hey, we're going to go and we're going to help and we're going to make things better. And then they were like, oh my gosh, this is how you treat the Americans? Well, screw you. We're going to not get involved in Africa anymore because, like, screw you. You people hate us. I mean, assuming, of course, that Africa, obviously we know it's not. Does anybody know what doesn't happen because of what happened in Somalia? Oh, not the Congo Wars. Does anybody know what doesn't happen? So what happened in Somalia was that we were there and a helicopter fell down and they mutilated the bodies of the American soldiers. Nope, not warlords. Well, darn it, Liam, now you know what you need to work on for the next 2 months. Okay, so what happens is there starts to be some kind of conflict between people in Rwanda, and you know who doesn't intervene? The United States, because we were all pissed off about what happened in Somalia. And we could have intervened and it could have helped, but we had lost our taste for intervention because it went so badly the last time that we did it. Yeah, and that is a huge reason that there was no political will to do anything about that, because it was maybe those two things were maybe 4 or 5 years apart. And I would submit to you that what happened with stopping communism in Vietnam and then no interest or care in stopping communism in Cambodia is a similar kind of thing. We kind of lost our taste for it, and it was about what was popular. It was not about what was actually the right thing to do, like really in either of those cases. I think that maybe there was less cause for the U.S. to be involved in Somalia, but there was more reason and rationale for the U.S. to be involved in Rwanda, and same, they didn't need to be in Vietnam, and we probably really did need to be in Cambodia 15 years later. So, yes. No, Rwanda did not happen because of Congo. So Rwanda, we'll talk about this more when we talk about decolonization in Africa, but one of the things that the Germans and then the Belgians did, particularly in Burundi and Rwanda, but also in a lot of other places, is they made some relatively false distinctions between different people groups. So, for instance, in Rwanda, the taller, slimmer people with the allegedly more European-looking noses were given preference by the Europeans. So if you looked a certain way, if you were tall, slim, had fair skin, vaguely European-ish nose, you were way more likely to get a position with the colonial government. And if you were stockier, darker skinned, had a relatively more African nose, you were less likely to be privileged by the colonial government. So you got this distinction between the Hutus and the Tutsis in both Burundi and Rwanda. And there have maybe been 4 major massacres. I mean, major massacres. And who is the victim and who is the perpetrator sort of changes because there's a desire for revenge, but that's got nothing to do with Congo. Nothing to do with Congo. So Sushruther, I think that's because racism, like, there are bad things that happened in Africa, and they're not terribly geographically far apart, but they're for very different reasons. So, I mean, yeah, it might be like an easy bookend to be like, oh, hey, look, here's these people, and look, they're killing each other, right? That's another thing that racist Americans and racist Europeans and just lots of racists like to say, is that they're like, oh, look, different African tribes are killing each other. Again, that's just what they do. Well, no, it's more complicated than that. It's a lot more complicated than that. And when we talk about decolonization, we will see that in a lot of cases, the way the Europeans showed up, the way the Europeans governed, and the way the Europeans left all contributed to significant conflict between those many different groups. p.m. You're going to go eat breakfast at 2:13. Perfect. Okay. So Congo does cause instability, but that is not what led to Rwanda. I'm sure it absolutely caused all kinds of stuff. Okay, let's see. Let's talk briefly about the Soviet war in Afghanistan. That's a couple more pages back. And Liam, we'll talk more about that the day that we talk about the decolonization, because yes, it was just a disaster. It was just all bad. Okay, so the Soviet war in Afghanistan. So what has Russia always wanted? And we will get to the Iran-Iraq war, although that's going to be brief. And then, yes, Cole is right. Cole is right. I mean, they do want more land and more Russia, but the thing they're desperate for that they can never get, because they've got plenty of land and plenty of Mother Russia, the thing that they can't get is a warm water port. So they're thinking that Afghanistan might, I mean, it's landlocked, but like it's moving them in the right direction. So they're looking for that. They know that this is an area that can potentially grow some opium. They are thinking that this is going to be an easy place to take over. If you have a chance, I would strongly suggest that you watch or read the book The Kite Runner. There is some, so trigger warning, there is some sexual assault in that book, but it really gives you a solid understanding of how awesome and great Afghanistan was, and then how it wasn't. So the United States ends up getting involved in that because Russia's involved, and they and it turns into a proxy war that really just totally tears up the country and makes it very possible for the Taliban to take over. Yep, the U.S. does give weapons that turn against them. We are actually pretty solid at that. Like, you know who trained Osama bin Laden? We did. The United States did. It was just ugly. And then eventually they were like, wait, the U.S. is totally just using us to achieve their own political and financial gains. And I mean, that's a pretty accurate assessment of what was happening. Now, given most countries are not going to do things that are about the plight of the Afghani people, no, we didn't care about the Afghani people. You mean further detail? Yes, yeah. Part of the Mujahideen turns into the Taliban, which is, of course, where Osama bin Laden was. And of course, right, his history is interesting anyways. He's a Saudi prince, but he becomes disillusioned with his life of riches, so he goes to become a freedom fighter, right? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And the U.S. was like, oh, we like the people that you're fighting for freedom against, so we'll go ahead and support you. So we had training camps, and the CIA was over there and all that jazz. Some of them, yes, he was absolutely a prince. I mean, there were lots of them. He wasn't like the prince. He was one of many. But yeah, yes, which is interesting, right? Because we had that travel ban that included bans from loads of Muslim countries, but not Saudi Arabia, even though that's where a significant number of the 9/11 terrorists came from. Yeah, it's all kinds of messed up. All kinds of messed up. Yeah, so Pakistan definitely has had an interesting relationship with this whole situation, right? And that's one of the reasons that when Osama bin Laden was finally captured / killed, that we invaded Pakistan rather than telling them that we were coming, because weirdly, every time we told them that we knew where bin Laden was and we were coming, somehow we always just missed him. Well, and so with Afghanistan too, it's really, really tragic. Like, here, let me find you guys some pictures. Well, I also taught, when I did English, I also taught the kite runner, and it's really heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking. Okay, so I'm going to give you probably the most iconic one, because Afghanistan had really was modernizing and all of that. What is the breadwinner? I've never even heard of that. Okay, so check out that picture, right? Those are like mini skirts. Look at the very Western hairstyles. This is the 1970s, so they've got those big butterfly collars. There were women who were studying at the university. You have women and men. It looks dead up like an American university. And you can see that's, it says Kabul, antes do Taliban, right? So that means before the Taliban. And then you get this religious group that comes in and says, wait, this is not right. We shouldn't be taking on these characteristics of Western societies. We need to go back to our roots. We need to make Afghanistan great again. We need to, return to our religious. And this is not the only time or place that this is happening. You also have, in 1979, you have the takeover of the the American embassy in Tehran. There's also a movie about that. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but it's a really good movie. And the Iranians really had a big problem with the United States then. They, not in a very modern way. I feel like it would work out very differently if this happened in the modern world. Argo, that's the name of the movie. That's what it's called. That's the one I was thinking of. So they didn't kill any of the hostages. They had 50 or 60 hostages. I want to say 53 maybe. And they didn't kill any of them, which is not how that would go down today, I don't think. They kept them alive. They all ended up staying in there together after it was taken over by these religious zealots. And eventually Iran released them, but Iran especially hated Jimmy Carter. So they waited until like 10 minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in and then released the hostages. They were not going to give, that was a complicated history. Like this complicated history that we have with the Middle East goes back well more than 40 years. One of the reasons that, let me see if I can find this other picture. What is that guy's name? So one of the reasons that we are not liked, again, is that thing where we install or support leaders who are friendly to U.S. policy, but are not good to their own people, or are in fact quite brutal to their own people. I can find this photo that I'm looking for. It's in a book that I have at school. Okay, so this image, I think, is real. It's very much like the one that I'm thinking of, but it's not the same one. But this is Reza Pahlavi, and if I didn't tell you that this guy is Middle Eastern, you probably wouldn't have known that. Yes, I meant 79. If I said 97, I transposed those numbers when I said it. I definitely meant 1979. My bad. Okay, so like this guy, this is the guy that the U.S. was supporting. And he got deposed, and then the United States, we send our little CIA over there, and then they propped him back up as the leader again, even though he was not the popular choice of the people. And somehow that makes other countries really mad when you do that. So the deal is that all of these places, like when we're talking about Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, they've got their own complicated political and ethnic histories, right? Like, so they're not far from where the Stans are. They're not far from where the Russians were. They, are not far from where the Mughals were. They're in the areas that were occupied by the Mongols. There are long, and very complicated histories that exist completely independent of any of the mess that relates to the Western world, to Christianity, like that's, oil. Right, yay, Iran's revolutions. I don't think I put that one on our list. Did I? Maybe? Is 226 on our list? I don't remember. I should have. I did. Okay, good job, me. Sweet. Probably the Middle East is like the place where Europe had the least success, but left maybe some of the worst legacies. And again, knowing the ins and outs of every single one of those is clearly not going to be paramount on the AP test, but if you want to understand global politics today, it is absolutely worth knowing. See what else we've got in here. You can read about the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Guatemala, the overthrow of the government in 1954, that's the one that I mentioned to you. That's the one for which I have the documents that include that CIA handbook on assassinations. I don't know. You think I should share that? I always felt weird handing that out to high school students. But when I was faculty at Moorhead and taught dual credit history, that was a source that they provided and insisted that I use. So I really had a lot of cover in terms of why are you handing out an assassination handbook to high schoolers. Also, it's declassified, so maybe they have come up with more interesting and clever ways to assassinate people. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, and that's not anything that you can't find on the internet anyways. I think we should probably stop there. That's a lot of content for one day. I would pay special attention as you're reading this then to the fall of East Germany and the Soviet Union. And I will try to find those other documents. I have a former student who wants them. Okay, so let me say a few words about the Iran-Iraq war, and then we'll wrap up. So there are religious differences between these countries. They are sort of the two most powerful countries in that region. Yes, the Kurds got gassed. The Kurds, right, it has been rough for the Kurds. Nobody wants them. Everybody is trying to kill them. Them and the Jews have really been chased around an awful lot. I think maybe the most salient point was that in the Iran-Iraq war, the United States stayed neutral for a while because, right, these two countries are effectively warring for dominance and power in the region. The United States decides to stay neutral, but there's this memo from where he describes that while we're not taking one side or another and we're neutral, we should have, quote, a tilt. So the United States decides that it wants a policy that is tilted in favor of Iraq. And I don't know why the Kurds should have been at Normandy. That's just dumb. But we decided that we were going to tilt in the direction of Iraq, and also that is where Saddam Hussein got a fair amount of his training and his weapons, etc., which is, you're like, wow, didn't you just say that about Osama bin Laden? Sure did. Yes, no, Liam, I know that's absolutely true. I have no idea where that came from, but yes, absolutely, Donald Trump did try to explain that the Kurds were not good allies. They didn't even help storm the beaches of Normandy. True facts. Can't make this stuff up. So, is there more that we're wanting to know about the Iran-Iraq war? I saw a movie, I guess it must have been 88 or 89. It was called Not Without My Daughter, and it had something to do with that. I was like 9, so I don't remember it that much, but that's a movie that relates. Sushruth, maybe you should link to the documentary. All right. So we have more housekeeping questions, or is there anybody on here who missed the housekeeping at the beginning? We know where to turn things in. We know when to turn them in. So I have to find the link. I have a former student who asked for it like 6 months ago, and I didn't send it. It's the CIA documents I got from Moorhead. So I will look for it, and I will also post all that other stuff that I already thought I posted, but apparently didn't. So my bad. I'm sorry about that. I'll work on getting the resources posted tonight or tomorrow morning. A lot of you were interested in battles and tactics, so that might be a good thing to watch. Great, thanks, Liam. Go ahead, Jonathan. You can go ahead and take notes on Mr. Garrett's Cold War packet. Okay, so Jacob, turning things in. We are going to be turning things in on Google Classroom. I'm going to make a separate assignment for each of the tasks on the updated sheet. And you're going to turn them in individually on there. If you have annotations, you can turn in pictures of the work. If your stuff is written by hand, you can turn in pictures. If you want to type it, you can do that. I know I had discouraged you all from typing things a long time ago, but I think that typing is going to make it way easier at this juncture for everybody. So that would be fine. Cameron, the graphic organizer part, I would just take a couple of pictures. Yeah, I would just take a couple of pictures. And then on the back of the Cold War packet we were just talking about, there's a map and there's some different stuff. I would just use the information that you have learned from reading it to fill out that map type page at the boxes. Just a brief description of those things. I think that's probably a good idea. Your dad got mad that you didn't know the Ayatollah? How old were you? Sonia, you can go either way. If you would prefer to annotate it and take lots of pictures of your annotations, that's fine. If you would prefer to take notes and take fewer pictures, or take notes on a computer and just put the file in the assignment spot on Google Classroom, that would be fine as well. I'm going to be pretty flexible just because I realize that this is suboptimal working conditions for most of us. Quiz bowl, right, Sushruth? I should have you like host a thing and ask my kids questions. Like we should just do that sometime for fun. We should just do history questions. Correct. So Esther, if you annotate, you do not need notes, but you have to take pictures then of all the pages. So Oh, so my kids don't know who the Ayatollah is, I'm pretty sure. Oh, I told you my son's watching Crash Course World History as part of his at-home schooling program, right? Told him he could watch any series he wanted, and that's the one he picked. Okay. Anybody have real questions? Or are we good? Does not watch Extra History. Not. I mean, he could. I just haven't pointed it out to him yet, but he's spending an awful lot of time playing Minecraft these days. All right. So I think that we're good to go. We can continue our discussion and you can ask me questions on here. So Mr. K walked away, but I bet that we, I have to watch the Cincinnati Zoo at 3. I don't know what, oh, they're doing the Red Panda today. We're doing Zoo Safari at 3 o'clock every day. You all should watch it. It's pretty awesome. Zoo, but for lazy people. All right. Oh, Susie, do you need something or are you talking about the quiz bowl thing?